Do you ever feel like no one in your school really gets you? We're going to change all that. In this episode, we're going to talk with Kurtis Hewson about how you can connect and collaborate with your colleagues so that you feel supported, seen, and truly valued as a member of your school team.
It's the Happy Music Teacher!
Are you an elementary music teacher who's frustrated and overwhelmed? I'm Jeanette Mahalchik, a happy music teacher who loves teaching every day, but it wasn't long ago I was in your shoes. Join me Wednesdays to help you find happy in your music classroom. Today, I have Kurtis Hewson on the podcast with me, and I'm really excited to welcome him. He is a business owner, an online business owner, a former principal, a faculty for some universities, and I'm really excited to have him on because he and I are part of a mastermind together. He has actually just joined our mastermind, and I'm really excited to get to know him because one of my drives as a music teacher is to collaborate with other teachers in the school. And it seems kind of difficult to do that as a music teacher because, our subject is so vastly different from other subjects. And a lot of times I think teachers don't understand, even principals don't understand how music can impact the curriculum. And so I thought it would be fun to have a conversation with Kurtis and sort of kind of delve into this. So Kurtis, we talked a little bit about your background and how you got started in all this. And if you could tell us just a little bit about your framework.
Yeah, for certain. And it's always feels a little uncomfortable when you get introduced as business owner because that absolutely am, but wasn't really the anticipated place as you mentioned off camera, the accidental entrepreneur. That was never the intent, but as we began to share what I'll give a brief explanation on around our collaborative response framework, realizing there's a lot of other educational organizations that want to learn more about this and turned into something on the side of the plate that actually needed its own plate over time. So yeah, really excited to be able to join. And I'm really excited to talk specifically about the music teacher aspect of collaboration. I think I have some thoughts and experiences that can really speak to that core audience that are part of this podcast. So as mentioned, the framework that we work through is collaborative response. And if anyone's interested in learning more, the easiest way is to go to our website. It's jigsawlearning.ca. That's the name of our company. All the information is there. But collaborative response is really a way of how we organize our schools to be able to respond to the needs of all students. And we're doing it in a way that is leveraging the most critical resource I think we have in education, and that's teachers and adults that are working with students. I'm a big believer that we do not do a good enough job leveraging the incredible expertise that exists in our school, and our collaborative response framework is one way that we do that. So it's simple in design, highly complex in actualization, but it really hinges in on three foundational components. And then I want to speak specifically to the collaborative part of this. So the first foundational component is collaborative structures and processes, how we set up people to work and operate in layers of team across our school. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. Awesome. Second foundational component is data and evidence and how we utilize the data and evidence to inform the conversations that are happening in those collaborative structures and processes. And then the third is a continuum, or we refer to as a continuum of supports, which is really how do we go about naming and articulating the explicit supports that we will put in place for students from the classroom to the school level to beyond the school, and getting really clear And there's some paradigms that we break through this collaborative response work. The first one is in relation to that continuum of we stop tiering kids and we tier the supports. That I've worked with so many schools that get trapped into the, well, this is a tier 2 student or a tier 3 student or whatever the language is. And we say, no, no, no. See the student as a human being. Let's tier our supports, knowing that a student at particular points in their education are going to need different types of supports being put in place for their success. We talk about layering of teams that go beyond just a traditional professional learning community perspective, which is a really powerful framework, but we kind of lean on that and go further with it. And then through the data and organization, we stop putting the majority of our focus on the students furthest away from success and put more attention on those ones who are close, or we often refer to them as the bubble students, using our data and evidence to kind of put where would we see the greatest impact for our energies and efforts. And it doesn't mean that we ignore our highest need students. Of course not. This is why layers of team are so important. There is supports and conversations happening for those students, but we try and make it so that every student is benefiting from the team perspective. So
I love,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's as quick of a understanding as I can provide without going too much further into the weeds.
That was actually perfect because, music teachers most music teachers do not collect data. Praise, because that would so not be, we see them here anyway, because Kurtis is in Canada. Here we see our students once a week for 30 minutes. Some teachers, it's more than that, 45, 50 minutes. Sometimes it's, twice a week, but notoriously once a week for 30 minutes. So for us to collect data or do, any sort of written testing, anything like that would be very challenging. So we don't know a lot about the data collection, most of us anyway, but I loved what you said about seeing the student as a whole person and not as a tier 1 or a tier 2.
Yeah.
We have a habit in today's society of labeling these children as something, and then that's how they're seen everywhere. And one of the really
100%.
cool things about being a music teacher is we get to see them in a different light, and we get to see them in a place where they're not struggling academically and they're not struggling with their language because they're in a place where, as they say, music is a universal language, and we get to see them in that area where sometimes I'll be talking to another teacher, a colleague, an admin, and we'll be talking about a certain student, and they'll be like, I had a student one time that just had terrible behavior challenges in every other place except my room. And I was talking to the art teacher, and they had given us some paperwork to fill out. And I was like, I'm not sure why we're getting this paperwork. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I don't have any problems with this student. So, it's nice to hear that there are people out there looking at the whole student. And I don't mean that in, there's a lot of fantastic teachers and administrators who are looking at children as a whole, but I think we're very quick to label, and we're very quick to, oh, this child is ADD or this child is EL or, whatever it happens to be. And then you put that label on that child and that's who they are, and that's
Absolutely.
how everyone looks at them. So it's really encouraging to hear that. The other thing I really liked about what you said is that you value the teachers and the people that are in the school. It sounds like a very high level, so
Absolutely.
and we as music teachers, I don't think that administrators feel this way or are trying to do this, but as music teachers, elementary especially, we feel kind of like the redheaded stepchild, if you will. I don't know if it's still a term, but in my generation it was. So, you know, we're not always looked at as part of the team. And so it's kind of cool to hear you say that.
Well, you're going to love this because I want to paint a picture of what these layers of teams look like and then
Perfect.
give a specific example of what would an elementary music teacher, how would they not only be involved, but a really valued part of this overall team structure. So we talk about within our collaborative response framework, 4 layers of team. And we found out over the last number of years that it doesn't matter if your school has 5,000 students or you're a micro school of 15, the same 4 layers of team need to be in place. So I'm going to give just a real quick breakdown, and then we'll talk specifically about the infusion of the music teacher within. So our first layer, any school that's engaged in PLC, professional learning communities work, will say, yeah, we've got the first layer covered. It's essentially, how do we create, we call it collaborative planning, but time for teachers to plan together, to be able to look at data and determine what are our next steps, to collaborate around curriculum. At that layer, we're not looking at individual students, we're looking at overall cohorts. So for instance, we may have at a high school, a science department team that come together, looks at some of their latest data and determine that, you know, we have a lot of students that are unclear on scientific method. So let's infuse some further learning and understanding around that department wide. Okay. And again, I'm going to come and place the music teacher in these layers in just a few
Awesome.
moments. Our second layer, we call a collaborative team meeting. And I'm going to come back to that because it's a really critical part. And when schools are first introduced to collaborative response, the collaborative team meeting, the second layer, is not there in any school not engaging in this work. It's a unique structure that I'll explain it because it looks like you're talking about kids, but you're really not. Our third layer, any school that has engaged in work around multi-tiered systems of supports or response to intervention would have this team. We call it a school support team. And essentially, it's who are the people who are looking at students who need support beyond the classroom. Typically within an American context, it's where your special ed conversations are happening. At that point, in my own school, it was myself as principal, the assistant principal, our learning support, which would be the equivalent of someone that's looking after the special education realm, and we had a family school liaison. The 4 of us would meet every Thursday, and it's which students are needing support beyond the classroom, which kids are getting referred to us from the teachers of, I've done everything, what else could we do? And then that 4th layer, we refer to as case consult, and it's just a broad term to be able to recognize that there are times where we're going to meet with one student on the agenda. That is going to happen. Every school since the beginning of time have had this layer of meetings where we're going to get together and talk about one student. But we know if you're a school of, well, we were 350 students at the time, and we couldn't be operating on one student at a time conversations.
Right.
But we take these 4 layers and really get them established. Now, the collaborative team meeting is a really essential part of the collaboration, and it's where the teachers are not just teachers, the adults that are working with students in the building are so empowered. This is what it looks like. I come to this meeting, and when we're first starting, it's I have a student and here's a key issue. Now in time, it's I've examined the data and here's something that's surfacing potentially, but it allows me a chance to say, I have Marcus, and right now the key issue I'm experiencing for Marcus is inappropriate interactions with peers when frustrated. This is what it looks like when this happens. Now, as quickly as possible, and I could go on for quite a while to talk about why the
I'm
structures,
sure.
the structure of the meeting, like it's a really formalized conversation that happens. But we, as quickly as possible, through someone facilitating, go and say, all right, key issue is this. Jeanette, do you have a student where you're seeing that as well? Just a name, no story. Other teacher, teacher C, do you have somebody? Teacher D, do you have somebody? And in this group, we identify a number of students, and then we quickly turn to the, okay, what could we do? Let's just open up our toolboxes. And this is where I love it in schools when we often say that first layer, collaboratively plan with people you share a common teaching experience with. And I'll come back to the music teacher in a second. But in the collaborative team meeting, it's actually powerful if we mix people up so that I'm able to come in an elementary context. In this conversation, I might have somebody teaching grade 2, somebody teaching grade 3, a music teacher, and a phys ed specialist in the conversation because we're trying to leverage divergent thinking and sharing of ideas. And so when you jump in and say, one of the strategies I use in my music classroom when that happens is this, and somebody else says, oh, interesting, in my room, I try this around this. And somebody else says, I was recently at a conference and here's a strategy or an idea. Now in time, we're not just brainstorming, we're looking at our continuum of supports for ideas and responses. But we often say in the collaborative team meeting, everyone's an expert and everyone's a learner. Nobody has this figured out completely of what to do in every situation with every kid, but
So true.
everyone has things that we can contribute. So we brainstorm and then we come back and say, all right, Kurtis, for Marcus, what's one thing that you want to try? And do you need help to do that? And it becomes a really, really powerful conversation that, again, it looks like you're talking about a student, but really what we're doing is we're examining practice and we're opening up doors. And we find over and over in this process, the collaborative capacity of the staff just goes to a whole new level because I might, after the meeting, wander down the hall to your classroom to say, hey, you mentioned this one YouTube site that you've been utilizing that has some great music connections for kids. Can you show me where that is? I'd love to see that. When we found in our school that we had literally hundreds of years of teaching experience, if you added up everyone collectively, but people didn't know what strategies people were using in their room. We didn't have opportunities to expose toolboxes. So every person, and we've seen over, and I'll speak specifically to the music teacher audience, our music teachers love these conversations because it's not about the numeracy scores of students. It's about, here's a key issue I'm experiencing, which can be a little bit more universal in practice.
That's
and then, of course, when we come to talk in that case consult, that fourth layer, we're going to talk about just Alex because there's stuff going on that we need to address. Let's bring everyone in who has a voice around Alex. Of course, you're teaching Alex in your music. I want you in there because I want to know, are you experiencing the same thing we're seeing in other classes? If not, why? What's happening? And then when it comes to that collaborative planning, this one is the interesting one. Oftentimes, it's the music teachers that go, I don't really fit any of the, because in most schools, I'm the solo teacher in this. And so we see schools that in the collaborative planning layer start to set up, especially post-COVID, virtual spaces where we have a grade 3 team that meets on a regular basis, but I provide release time for my music teacher to meet with 2 other music teachers from 2 other schools. That's their collaborative planning that happens. So it's a really, really powerful way to establish layers of teams where everybody's expertise is not only leveraged, but being grown through every conversation.
This is amazing. I mean, I'm really hoping that this whole thing just takes off across the United States. I don't know how many schools you have here, but there's so much that I really like about it. The fact that you're including every adult in the school building, and because we as specialists often talk about, we'll get together with the other people on our specialist team, if you will, and we'll talk about just things like, I wish that the principal had approached us to talk about these particular students before they put them all in a class together.
Yeah.
We there are so many things that we see in our, and we see, you know, the same kids year after year, especially if you're in like a pre-K through 5 or a pre-K through 6 class school, and you get to know the kids in a way that the classroom teachers do not, because unless they're going to go through 2 grade levels with a student, they see them for that 1 year and then they're gone. Whereas for us, we see them for, you know, 5, 6, 7 years at a time. And I had a student a couple years ago, right before I left full-time teaching, who in 4th grade, no issues with him. In 5th grade, there was a lot going on. And I remember approaching the teacher and saying, there is something going on somewhere, because this is not behavior we've seen. And she was taken aback. She was like, oh, I didn't know that, you know. So I think that we bring a lot to the table, and it's nice
100%.
to, and a lot of times, because we're teaching music or art, they look at us as, you know, we're teachers too. We're just specialists, you know, we
Yep.
specialize in something, and that's the way I kind of try to term it, rather than the specials team. We are specialists in one subject, just like, you know, middle school or high school, you're a specialist in one subject. So it's really cool to hear that. And then the other thing that I really liked is, I have a question for you regarding if you've got, if everybody's got a student who kind of fits into that same, okay, I'm experiencing this with this student and I'm experiencing similar things with another student, do you then put them into kind of a place where you can talk about them together, so to speak?
Yeah, so that collaborative team meeting, that second layer of team where we talk about there's actual power in not having the same people who are meeting in their collaborative planning together, but that we start to mix those teams a little bit. What we try and do in that is we have a focus ahead of time, an overarching focus. So let's say, for instance, we said today's focus is wellness. So bring students with key issues related to wellness. Come ready. And we utilize a simple pre-meeting organizer that would have you list the kid's name and what's a key issue. Now, when I get into the meeting, we start off, as a facilitator, I start off with saying, all right, Jeanette, you've come ready. What's a celebration that you have for a student? And I'm going to ask you what you think you did that led to that celebration. So we always start off with celebrations to start, just a few minutes.
Love
And
it.
the key of the celebrations is not just a yay conversation, but it's a, I've seen this change in the student, and I think what I did that led to that was X. We're trying to build high levels of efficacy and people being able to articulate what they did that led to that success. Now, someone in the room, when you say, one of the things I've done that I think has led to that success is I send a quick note home to the parent every second day, just as a celebration note. Now, someone in the room goes, that's interesting. That's a neat idea. I hadn't thought of that. And where you're going, well, it's not really anything that special. Well, for someone else in the room, that might be gold. Then
Right.
we turn and say, all right, now let's move to our key issue. Jeanette, what's a key issue you've brought? Now, you might share something that no one else was aware of yet, where you might say, I have Micah, and the key issue is he cannot, his short-term memory is, he has a lot of trouble remembering concepts that we did the week before. I only get to see him once a week, and I feel like I'm constantly having to reteach concepts. So now we want to be, and a facilitator might ask you a few questions just to drill in. But when we get, let's say the key issue comes down to recalling key concepts that are critical for the learning. Then I can turn to another teacher and say, do you have a student? I don't want the story. Don't tell me what you've done, what you've tried, just a name, because we're trying to get the attention off Jeanette, the teacher, and off the student that she surfaced to bring this. Because if it turns into I have Alex, well, then it's possible in the room that, oh, I taught his sister. Let me tell you what happened with her. And we can admire the problem. We're trying to get to that key issue. And the reason why we assign other students is so that we can say, well, this is something shared. It's not Jeanette's problem. It's something we are experiencing. And then we brainstorm, and then we come back and say, all right, Jeanette, what's one thing that you want to try for Micah? And we see through this process is over time, people start to stretch. They start saying, I'll try Kurtis's idea, but I'm going to need some help. I need to see what that looks like. I might need some further resources related to that. And then once we've had that key issue conversation, and usually it's about 8-10 minutes, then we'll go, okay, let's now turn to Sarah. Sarah, who's a student you've brought under our umbrella of, let's say if today was wellness, umbrella of wellness, and what's a key issue you're experiencing? So the process is really, really important. And like I started us off with earlier, it looks from an outsider like you're talking about kids, but really all you're doing is using a student to leverage a conversation about practice.
Right, right. And I would imagine that schools that have this in place are not only experiencing learning gains with their students, and I would think, the students would be happier and et cetera. But I would imagine that you're also making the teachers feel more valued, like the entire team. And one of the things that you pointed out earlier was that, we as music teachers, elementary especially, are on our own island. And that's one of the reasons that I created the Happy Music Teacher Academy, was to have that, because we do a lot of collaboration in there where we'll get together. We did a whole curriculum map this summer, and it took us like
Awesome.
5 weeks, but it was a challenge that we all faced, that we said, we're going to sit down and we're going to do this. So I would imagine that, you're just, teachers feel more valued. Adults in the classroom, your school psychologist, or the other adults that are taking care of the children, must feel more valued and be able to share ideas as a team member. Seems like a really great thing. That seems like just a fantastic opportunity.
Well, there's a few things that happen, and you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely, it's leading to positive outcomes for kids. And that's way back in the initial genesis of what eventually led to this. And it looked nothing like what it does now initially. That's what we were doing, is how can we work better to support more kids? So we see positive outcomes for students. And there's lots of times in those meetings where we say, you know what, why don't we work together for these 4 students we identified, because we might as well do this together than each person taking away a separate action. But the impact on adult efficacy, even wellness, nobody feels alone. When I come in and say I'm struggling with this key issue, lots of times when schools start, that's hard for people to come and say, I have this key issue, because you're essentially saying, I don't know what to do.
Right. And that's really hard. It's really hard to admit that I might be doing something wrong and I don't know how to fix it.
Right. But then when someone else in the room goes, yeah, me too. And then we say, but what could we do? And then I offer an idea and you go, even if you don't say anything, but I see your pen come out and you're writing that idea down, that's really gratifying for me. And we see this over and over, is that and I'll use teacher as a broad term, because even people without the position of teacher are still teaching in our buildings. Right. Everybody walks away with feeling that their expertise is being honored. But I walked away with 3 new things that are not rocket science necessarily. And the other thing that we see is, even though that meeting's a very formalized, like if you were to watch a video clip, I often have some people say, oh my goodness, you're kind of like a drill sergeant a little bit when you're facilitating, because it's really follows a process to a T. But we find the informal collaboration that happens outside goes to a whole new level. All of a sudden, I was just in a meeting with you and heard this idea. I'm wandering down to your classroom after school because I want to learn more. or I'm
or maybe
stopping. Yeah.
going and observing the class,
Yeah. I'm
going and saying,
stopping.
okay, I need to know how you're doing that.
Yeah. I've never been in the music classroom before, but all of a sudden I'm coming in with a critical eye of how are you putting up visuals?
Mhm.
Because you mentioned that the use of visuals for key terms is really powerful in your room. And how could I apply that in my mathematics teaching?
Right, right.
It becomes so
I love
powerful.
everything about this.
Yeah, and the informal conversations also, we saw it dramatically, even just within our staff lunchroom, of instead of people coming in with, oh my goodness, you won't believe what Tyrone did today, it's, oh my goodness, you won't believe what Tyrone did today. Anyone have an idea of something I could try in the
Oh, I love
afternoon?
that.
Like it
Mhm.
just changes the dialogue
The
that is
whole
happening.
dynamic, the whole feel of the school. I mean, it really is like, I can see it as just kind of life changing, if you will, for everybody in the school. So
100%.
that's pretty awesome.
Well, and
So
I think the thing, and I was just in a conversation with someone yesterday on our podcast where they said, um, we see ourselves as a team way more than we ever have before. And when we say team, we actually really mean it. And everyone is a part of that team. Where before, I might have said I was part of the team, but really, I'm just working with the two or three people down my end of the hallway that I am teaching something similar with. And like you said, all of a sudden you have someone who's teaching arts feeling like they're on an island, and a
yeah,
music on an island, or I'm the one phys ed teacher and I I'm getting forced into some different collaboration that this doesn't really support or help what I'm doing with in my classes.
right, right. So let me ask you, for those teachers out there who don't have this in place yet, and we are going to talk about how to get in touch with you and like what would be the best avenue for a music teacher to approach their administrator about this program, because I really think it's so valuable for everybody in the school that if you are a music teacher and your school is not doing this yet, you need to approach your administrator. So
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that. But what can we as specialists do to sort of promote some of that collaboration before your program becomes a part of our school?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll do is, following our conversation, I'll reach out and share with you a link on our website that
Perfect.
has a number of clips of the collaborative team meeting. So that's that one meeting, and it's a part of collaborative response. It's not the whole thing, but usually when people see that meeting in action, they go, "Whoa, that's a different way of
Powerful.
talking about kids. That's powerful." So I'll share that with you, and on that part of our website, there's a video clip of a meeting. Actually, there's three different video clips of a meeting in action. There's a podcast that breaks down all the essential components. Um, I would say that's whenever I talk with teachers specifically, I usually say that would be a great one to share with your administrator, because typically once people see that meeting, they go, oh, this is different than what
Mhm.
we've done. And it can serve as a bit of the um, soft entry into understanding the bigger overall framework. I'll also share with you, we have a short, I think it's 7-page article that provides an overview of collaborative response. That's also a really nice, we've had a lot of teachers that download it and then share it with their administrators as well. And then we also, on our website, which is jigsawlearning.ca, we do have a number of small little clips that have teachers and leaders that are sharing, as a result of this work, we've seen X. And again, there's huge power when you can see and hear colleagues, not authors, but
Yeah.
other teachers saying this has radically changed how we support kiddos and each
Yeah,
other.
I mean, and radically changed how you interact with each other, which I think,
Mhm.
especially in elementary schools, with, as I was reading a book today that was talking about how women tear each other down, and we are very much a female focused in most elementary schools. And
Absolutely.
to put something like this in place where people are building each other up, and the whole concept is we're helping each other, is just incredible. I'm very excited to have met you, Kurtis.
The other great thing that I can share is I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this that say, "Oh, we already collaborate in our school. We already work together well as a team." In those schools, I've had them come and respond back that this just took us to another level.
Yeah.
We were doing good things for kids and for each other before, but we've basically poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. There are a lot of schools that are doing it right, and this would just to have an actual framework to work within just would really take things to a new level.
Yeah, and it's definitely been our experience with it.
Well, I so appreciate you coming on. This was kind of a departure, and when I read a little bit about what you were doing, I was like, I feel like I need to have you on the podcast because, as music teachers, I feel a strong sense of urgency that we need to be able to, first of all, collaborate with the other teachers and the administrators in our building, but also I think we have a unique responsibility because we have every student in the school in
Of
most
course.
cases. And I'm always trying to drive that message home, is that you are part of this team, and no matter whether you're treated like that or not, and there are a lot of teams that do treat their music teacher with respect and as part of the team, but then there are a lot that don't. So whether or not you're treated like that, you still have that responsibility, and you want to bring positive energy to that. And one of the ways you can do that is by encouraging collaboration and asking questions of, if you're having a struggle with a student. I'm always amazed at how, I'll go and talk to the guidance counselor, I'll talk to a teacher, and just kind of open those pathways of communication so that people understand that you are as invested in the students as they are. So, and I think
Yeah.
that's a really big deal.
Well, and I'll give just one small observation from my role working with schools, but as an administrator as well. I think I could paint a pretty broad brush to say music teachers have some exceptionally strong, not just music teaching skills, but pedagogy skills. And specifically when it comes to routines, if everyone could pick a music teacher's brain about how to set up effective routines to help support classroom management, because you mentioned already, you might only have this group of students for 30 minutes once a week. I think there's, just like every teacher could benefit from picking the brain of a kindergarten or early learning teacher, picking the brain of a music teacher of how they set up consistent and predictable routines would that's only one small example of expertise that could benefit a lot of other people.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I know my listeners will as well. And that's definitely, there's a lot we bring to the table, but I also think we always complain as a group, generalize that, we go to these meetings that don't really apply to us. But to me, I always go into those meetings and I think I'm going to take away one nugget from this meeting. There's got to be something, even if it's, a reading teacher meeting and that's all they're talking about. There's got to be one nugget in there that I can go back and take into my classrooms.
And this is the power of that collaborative team specifically, is you're probably leaving with 2, 3, 4, if not new ideas, then reminders of things that, oh my goodness, I've been struggling with a student and I forgot that one little strategy that I used to do. Why didn't I think about it? Well, teaching's a very complex undertaking, and how could you possibly remember every single strategy, tool, resource to support students that you've encountered in your lifetime?
Exactly. Well, Kurtis, I really appreciate you coming and speaking with me today, and I'm excited to hear the feedback from the music teachers that listen.
Yeah, I would love to hear thoughts and ideas, and please reach out if there's questions or comments that any of your listeners have. I'd love to be able
And
to.
tell us one more time your website. I will put it in the show notes, but your website, and if there is a way to contact you, an email address or anything like
Yeah.
that.
The easiest way is to go to jigsawlearning.ca. So that's not .com, but .ca, as we're in Canada. And all of the contact information is there. Our Jigsaw Learning team are on all the social medias, and my email address is there as well to be able to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, this has been great to be able to connect with you. Thank you so much.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com.
Well, that's all I have for you today. But before I go, I want to remind you, keep learning, keep growing, and keep being fabulous you.